The Beatles battled a silent crowd in USA. Then one melody sparked total chaos. Washington, D.C. Coliseum. February 11th, 1964. The Beatles' first concert on American soil. History books would call it triumphant, a watershed moment. The night Beatlemania conquered America, but for the first 17 minutes it was a disaster. John Lennon stood at his microphone, guitar strapped across his chest, staring out at 92 faces that looked like they'd been carved from stone. No screaming, no fainting, no hysteria. Just nothing. "Evening, Washington," John said, his Liverpool accent cutting through the PA system. "We're the Beatles." Polite applause, scattered. Cold. Paul McCartney glanced at George Harrison. George looked at Ringo. Ringo just kept his eyes on his drums, like if he didn't look at the crowd, maybe they'd disappear. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. In England, they couldn't walk down the street without causing riots. In Europe, girls threw themselves at their tour bus. But here, in America, the land they dreamed of conquering, they were being met with the kind of reception you'd give a mediocre cover band at a wedding. Google images the Beatles' Washington, D.C. Coliseum 1964. The problem was simple and complicated. Most of the audience hadn't bought tickets because they wanted to see the Beatles. They bought tickets because their parents, their friends, their newspapers had told them this was the thing to see. Curiosity seekers, skeptics, people who thought rock and roll was a passing fad that would die any day now. And they were sitting there, arms crossed, waiting to be impressed. Right then, John muttered under his breath, "Let's give them something to be impressed about." They launched into Roll Over Beethoven, Chuck Berry's classic, a song that always got crowds moving. But tonight it fell flat. People watched. They didn't feel. John could see it in their eyes. They were analyzing, not experiencing, judging, not enjoying. This was supposed to be their American dream. Instead, it felt like a nightmare. The Beatles hadn't slept in 36 hours. They'd flown from London to New York, done the Ed Sullivan Show to 73 million viewers, then immediately flown to Washington for this concert. They were exhausted, jet-lagged, and now standing in front of the coldest audience they'd ever faced. John Lennon was 23 years old, the sharp-tongued leader who hid his insecurities behind wit and sarcasm. Tonight, those insecurities were screaming, "What if we're not good enough for America? What if this whole thing was a mistake?" Paul McCartney, 21, was the charmer, the one who could usually win over any crowd with a smile and a wink. But his charm was bouncing off this audience like light off a mirror. George Harrison, 20, was the quiet one, the spiritual seeker who just wanted to play his guitar and be left alone. He could feel the weight of 92 pairs of eyes judging every note he played. And Ringo Starr, 23, the drummer who'd only been with the band for 18 months, he was hitting his drums harder than necessary, trying to force energy into a room that refused to give it back. They finished Roll Over Beethoven. Polite applause. Again. "Thank you very much," Paul said into his microphone, flashing that famous smile. "Your wonderful audience." It was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie. A man in the fifth row yawned, visibly, deliberately. John saw it. Something inside him snapped. "You know what?" John said, his voice sharp. "We flew 3,000 miles to be here tonight. The least you could do is pretend to give a damn." The audience stirred, uncomfortable, uncertain. Paul shot John a warning look. Don't antagonize them, but John was past caring. "We're not here to bore you," John continued. "We're here to play music, real music, not the sanitized rubbish you've been fed by your radio stations. So either wake up and listen, or go home and let someone who actually wants to be here take your seat." The Coliseum went dead silent. Brian Epstein, their manager, was having a panic attack in the wings. This was not how you won over American audiences. This was how you ended careers. But something in John's honesty cut through the pretense. A girl in the third row, 16 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes, suddenly stood up. "We're listening," she shouted. "We want to hear you." Then another voice, "Play something real," and another, Show us what you've got. The crowd was waking up. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that. Powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. 5. Songs in, still nothing. The Beatles were dying on stage and they knew it. John's frustration was turning into anger. Paul's charm was wearing thin. George looked like he wanted to disappear. Ringo was just hitting things. This next song, Paul said, trying one more time, to connect, is one we wrote ourselves. It's called I Wanna Hold Your Hand. It was their biggest hit, the song that had reached #1 in America just days before, the song that should have had this crowd in the palm of their hands. But as they started playing, the response was the same, polite, distant, dead. John stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, kept playing for a few seconds before realizing their lead singer had gone silent. What's the point? John said into the microphone. The music stopped. 80-92. People stared at him. What's the bloody point of us being here if you lot are just going to sit there like you're at a funeral? Paul tried to intervene. John, come on. No, Paul, I'm serious. What are we doing here? We could be back in Liverpool playing to people who actually care. Instead, we're in Washington playing to a room full of people who look like they'd rather be getting their teeth pulled. The audience was starting to react now. Some people looked offended. Others looked intrigued. A few were starting to smile. You want to know the truth? John continued. We're scared. We're 4 lads from Liverpool who grew up with nothing, and somehow we ended up here in America playing for you, and we're terrified that we're not good enough, that you'll see through us and realize we're just kids who got lucky. The honesty was brutal, raw, unexpected. But you know what? John said, his voice getting stronger. We're not going to stand here and beg you to like us. We're going to play one more song, and if you still don't care after that, then fine. We'll pack up and go home. But this song is who we really are. He looked at Paul, George, and Ringo. Boys, let's show them. Paul nodded. George adjusted his guitar. Ringo raised his sticks. This song, John said quietly, is called Twist and Shout. And then they exploded. The opening chord hit like lightning, not louder than before, not faster, just different. This wasn't the Beatles trying to impress anyone. This was the Beatles being themselves. Well, shake it up, baby, now. John's voice was raw, ragged, real. Twist and shout. Something shifted in the room. A girl in the front row uncrossed her arms. Come on, come on, come on, come on, baby, now. A guy in the back started tapping his foot. Come on and work it on out. The energy was building, slowly, like a wave gathering strength before it crashes. Paul was bouncing on his toes, his bass driving the rhythm forward. George's guitar was cutting through the air like a knife. Ringo was pounding his drums with everything he had. And John was possessed. His voice cracked on the high notes. He didn't care. His movements were wild, uncontrolled. He didn't care. This was pure, unfiltered rock and roll. You know you twist, little girl. The girl in the third row, the one who'd shouted earlier, started dancing. You know you twist so fine. Her friends joined her. Come on and twist a little closer now. A section of the audience stood up. And let me know that you're mine then. Another section, and another. The Colosseum was transforming. What had been a cold, skeptical audience was becoming a living, breathing organism, moving, feeling, connecting. John looked out and saw it happening, the walls coming down, the pretense disappearing, the real people emerging. He smiled, not the media smile, the real one. Well, shake it, shake it, shake it, baby, now. The crowd was screaming now, really screaming. The kind of screaming that would become synonymous with Beatlemania. But this wasn't manufactured hysteria. This was genuine, from the gut response to music that made them feel alive. "Shake it up, baby," girls were crying. Guys were jumping. People who'd come to judge were now losing their minds. The Beatles felt it too. That electric current that runs between performer and audience when real magic happens. They played harder, louder, with more passion than they'd ever played before. This was what they'd come to America for. This was the dream. The song ended. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. Then explosion. The crowd erupted. Not polite applause. Not obligatory clapping. Pure, uncontrolled chaos. Girls were screaming so loud that the sound technicians had to cover their ears. People were rushing toward the stage. Security guards were overwhelmed. The Beatles stood there, stunned. What the hell just happened? "More," someone screamed. "Play it again," the chant started. "Twist and shout, twist and shout." 92 people stomping their feet, clapping their hands, demanding more. John looked at his bandmates. They were all thinking the same thing. "This is it. This is what we came for." "You want more?" John shouted into the microphone. The crowd roared. "You want us to stay?" Louder. "Then show us you care." The response was deafening. The Beatles launched into Twist and Shout again. But this time it was different. This time the entire Coliseum was singing along. 92 voices joining 4. The building was shaking, literally shaking. The stage was vibrating under their feet. Girls were fainting. Security was carrying them out. But for everyone who fainted, 2 more pushed forward to take her place. This was Beatlemania, the real thing. Not manufactured by media hype, born from genuine connection between artists and audience. Paul was grinning so wide his face hurt. George was finally relaxed, lost in the music. Ringo was hitting his drums like his life depended on it. And John was home. This was why they'd started playing music. Not for fame, not for money, for this. For the moment when strangers become family through shared experience. When music stops being sound and becomes feeling. When a cold crowd transforms into a living celebration. The concert lasted another hour, but everyone who was there agreed. The moment that changed everything was Twist and Shout. The moment when the Beatles stopped trying to be what America expected and started being who they really were. Backstage, the Beatles collapsed, exhausted, exhilarated, changed. "Did that really just happen?" George asked, his voice hoarse from singing. "I think so," Paul said, laughing. "I think we just conquered America." John was quiet, thinking. "You know what?" he finally said. "We almost gave up. We almost walked off that stage." "But you didn't," Brian Epstein said, appearing in the doorway. His panic had transformed into pride. "You trusted yourselves, and you won them over." The reviews the next day were unanimous. The Beatles proved they're the real deal. British invasion begins with explosive Washington concert. 4 lads from Liverpool change American music forever. But the real impact wasn't in the reviews. It was in what happened next. Every concert after Washington was sold out. Not with curiosity seekers, with believers. The Beatles had proven something that night. That authenticity beats perfection. That honesty beats polish. That being real beats being what people expect. The girl from the 3rd row, the one who'd stood up first, was interviewed by a local newspaper. "I came to that concert thinking the Beatles were just another boy band," she said. "I left knowing I'd witnessed something historic. They weren't performing for us. They were sharing themselves with us. That's the difference." Other musicians took notice. Bob Dylan, who'd been skeptical of the Beatles, went to see them after hearing about the Washington concert. "They reminded me why I started playing music," he said later. "Not to be famous, to connect." The Rolling Stones, who were just starting out, studied footage of that concert. "The Beatles showed us that you can't fake passion," Mick Jagger said. "You either have it or you don't." And that night they had it. For the Beatles themselves, Washington became a touchstone. Whenever they felt lost, whenever the pressure got too much, they'd remember that night. The night they almost gave up, and then didn't. Today, over 60 years later, the Washington, D.C. Coliseum concert is legendary. Not because it was perfect, because it was real. Music historians call it the moment the Beatles became the Beatles in America. The night when four scared kids from Liverpool transformed into the biggest band in the world. But the real legacy isn't about fame or success. It's about what happens when you stop trying to be what others expect and start being who you truly are. The Beatles could have played it safe that night, could have stuck to their set list, could have accepted the cold reception and moved on. Instead, they took a risk. They got honest. They got real. And in doing so, they gave 92 people permission to do the same, to stop pretending, to stop judging, to stop being cool, and just feel. That's the power of music. Not to impress, to connect. The Washington Coliseum was demolished in 2019, but before it was torn down, thousands of people visited to stand where the Beatles had stood, to feel the energy of that historic night. A plaque now marks the spot where the stage once was. On this stage, the Beatles taught America to feel again. February 11, 1964. Musicians who visit the site often report feeling inspired, reminded of why they started playing music in the first place. Not for the applause, for the connection. John Lennon, before his death, was asked about his favorite Beatles performance. "Washington," he said without hesitation, because that's when we stop being afraid of being ourselves. Paul McCartney still tells the story at his concerts. "We almost walked off that stage," he says, "but something told us to give it one more shot, to play one more song, and that song changed everything." The lesson of that night isn't just for musicians. It's for anyone who's ever felt like they're not good enough, anyone who's ever been tempted to give up, anyone who's ever wondered if being themselves is enough. The Beatles proved that night that authenticity is the most powerful force in the world. That one honest moment beats 1,000 perfect performances. That real connection requires real vulnerability. That sometimes the thing that saves you is the thing you're most afraid to show. A cold crowd, four scared kids, one melody, and everything changed. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop trying to be perfect and start being real. That's when the magic happens. That's when cold crowds come alive. That's when we remember why we're here. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember their own power. Tell us in the comments, when was the last time you chose authenticity over perfection? Let's keep this conversation going.